Have you ever stared up at the night sky, really stared, until the stars seemed to swim into focus, like tiny, impossible diamonds scattered across black velvet? Have you felt that ancient hum, that primal whisper that tells you there's something infinitely vast, infinitely mysterious just beyond our grasp? If you have, then you've already felt the pull of Timbuktu, even if you didn't know it. You've tapped into the same wonder that drew scholars, merchants, and mystics to a city forged from sand and dreams, a place where the desert wind carried not just dust, but the whispers of the cosmos. Imagine, if you will, the deepest quiet you've ever experienced. Not the quiet of a hushed library or a sleepy house in the dead of night. No. This is the quiet of the Sahara, where the sand dunes stretch out like sleeping giants, red gold in the dying light, and the only sound is the whisper of the wind, a timeless breath across an ancient land. You're standing there feeling the last warmth leach from the earth, and then, as the sun dips below the horizon in a spectacular, fiery flourish, the stars begin to emerge, not one by one timidly, but in a rush, a cascade of light so bright you feel you could reach out and pluck them from the inky black. This isn't your city, sky-battling light pollution and smog. This is the undiluted, unadulterated, raw power of the universe laid bare. It's enough to make you feel very, very small, and yet paradoxically, utterly connected. This is the stage upon which our story unfolds: the desert, vast and unforgiving, yet also a canvas for the most profound observations of the heavens. It's easy to picture Timbuktu now as a dusty, somewhat isolated outpost, but for centuries it was anything but. It was a thriving metropolis, a crossroads of civilizations, a beacon of learning in a world often shrouded in ignorance. And at its heart, among its bustling markets and grand mosques, was a fervent, insatiable curiosity about the very stars you're now imagining. You see, the people of Timbuktu didn't just look at the stars. They interrogated them, charted them, sought to understand their intricate dances. They weren't just romantics. They were rigorous scientists long before the term scientist even existed in the way we understand it today. You might be thinking, astronomy in the desert sounds hot and sandy. And yes, it was. Very hot, very sandy. But the clarity of the desert sky, devoid of the mists and light pollution of more temperate climes, made it an astronomer's paradise. It was like having a giant, perfectly calibrated telescope built right into the landscape. No fancy observatories, needed just open air and keen eyes. Historians still argue whether the clarity of the desert sky was the primary driver for Timbuktu's astronomical prowess, or if it was the confluence of cultures and a pre-existing intellectual tradition. My money's on a bit of both, with a generous sprinkle of they just really loved staring at sparkly things in the dark. The notion of a desert university might sound like a contradiction, conjuring images of scholars huddled under palm trees with sand in their parchment. But Timbuktu's learning institutions were far from primitive. They were sophisticated, highly organized centers of knowledge akin to the great universities of Fez or Cairo, but with a unique West African flavor. Imagine walking through narrow, labyrinthine streets, the air thick with the scent of spices and the murmur of a dozen languages. You pass by mud-brick buildings, seemingly unassuming, but step inside and you're met with the hushed reverence of a library, shelves overflowing with scrolls and bound volumes. Or perhaps you hear the animated discussions of scholars, debating the finer points of planetary motion, their voices rising and falling like the desert wind. It wasn't all serious, though. Even ancient scholars needed a break. I like to imagine a particularly intense debate on, say, the precession of the equinoxes getting so heated that someone eventually jokes, Perhaps we should just ask the stars themselves. They seem to be ignoring our squabbles. Or maybe after a long night of observations, someone would quip, "Well, at least we know for sure the moon isn't made of fermented camel milk." Shame, really. I was hoping for a celestial dairy. Yes, even stargazers can appreciate a bit of lightheartedness. It's all part of the human experience, even when you're grappling with the infinite. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked is that Timbuktu, at its zenith, was home to dozens of Quranic schools and a university that attracted scholars from across the Islamic world and even beyond. It was a true intellectual melting pot. And a quirky tidbit. Some of these scholars, in their pursuit of astronomical accuracy, use specific types of rare glowing desert plants as markers for their nighttime observations, believing their subtle luminescence enhanced their visual acuity. Whether it actually helped or was just a charming superstition is up for debate, but it certainly adds a touch of mystique to their already impressive dedication. You're standing at the edge of this incredible history, feeling the echoes of those quiet nights. The desert air is cool now, carrying the faint scent of charcoal and something indescribably ancient. You can almost hear the rustle of a scholar's robes, the scratch of a reed pen on parchment, the gentle murmur of voices discussing the secrets of the universe. This journey into Timbuktu's stargazing past isn't just about dusty old books and forgotten calculations. It's about the enduring human desire to look up to wonder and to find meaning in the vast, silent canvas above. It's about remembering that even in what seems like the middle of nowhere, profound knowledge can blossom, reaching for the stars. So you're standing there beneath that impossibly clear desert sky, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, and you can almost taste the ambition, the sheer intellectual hunger that transformed Timbuktu from a humble trading post into a true intellectual oasis. But how did this happen? How did a city seemingly in the middle of nowhere become a magnet for the sharpest minds of its era, drawing them like iron filings to a powerful intellectual force field? It wasn't just magic, though. There's certainly a magical aura about it. It was a confluence of factors, a perfect storm of geography, economics, and a profound respect for learning that allowed Timbuktu to blossom. First, let's talk about the practical stuff. Trade routes. You see, Timbuktu wasn't, just sitting out there twiddling its thumbs. It was strategically positioned at the nexus of several major trans-Saharan trade routes. Imagine vast caravans of camels stretching for miles across the dunes, laden with everything from salt from the north to gold and cola nuts from the south. And yes, sometimes even exotic pets. I like to picture a particularly adventurous merchant trying to smuggle a sleepy, slightly grumpy giraffe across the desert, only to be told by a customs official, "Sir, are you sure that's a service animal?" Okay, maybe not giraffes, but you get the idea. A vibrant, bustling exchange of goods. These trade routes weren't just conduits for commerce. They were arteries for ideas. With every camel train that arrived, every merchant who unpacked their wares came stories, news, and, crucially, knowledge. Scholars would accompany these caravans, seeking new texts, engaging in debates, or simply looking for a place where intellectual curiosity was not just tolerated, but celebrated. You have to remember this was a time when information traveled slowly, often painstakingly by word of mouth or handwritten manuscript. A major trading hub was a natural place for the exchange of these precious commodities. Beyond the practicalities, there was a deeply ingrained cultural reverence for knowledge and scholarship. In many West African societies at the time, learning was seen as a profound virtue, a path to spiritual enlightenment and societal advancement. This wasn't just about religious texts. It extended to mathematics, law, medicine, and of course astronomy. The great Malian empires, particularly the Mali Empire, actively fostered this environment. They invested in schools, supported scholars, and created an atmosphere where the pursuit of wisdom was considered noble work. It was like the Silicon Valley of its day, but instead of coding startups, they were launching intellectual enterprises. You might wonder, what kind of scholars were we talking about? We're not just talking about Islamic theologians, though. They were certainly a significant presence. Timbuktu attracted polymaths, individuals who excelled in multiple disciplines. You'd find jurists meticulously interpreting complex legal texts alongside mathematicians grappling with algebraic equations and medical practitioners studying ancient remedies. And among them, of course, were the astronomers, who often wore multiple hats, serving as astrologers, timekeepers, and navigators. One fascinating mainstream historical fact is the sheer volume of manuscripts that existed in Timbuktu. Estimates suggest that at its peak, the city held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, rivaling and in some ways even surpassing the great libraries of Alexandria or Baghdad. These weren't just copies of the Quran. They covered an astonishing array of subjects, from poetry and history to sophisticated scientific treatises. It was an intellectual treasure trove, a testament to the insatiable appetite for learning that characterized the city. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some scholars in Timbuktu were rumored to keep trained desert foxes as companions in their study chambers. The foxes apparently were adept at catching scorpions and other unwelcome desert critters that might otherwise disturb a scholar's concentration during a late-night session of unraveling celestial charts. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or merely a charming legend, but it paints a wonderfully eccentric picture, doesn't it? Imagine a distinguished scholar, quill in hand, with a vigilant fox curled up by his ink pot, occasionally twitching an ear at a rustle in the corner. The concept of a university in Timbuktu wasn't a single monolithic institution like Oxford or the Sorbonne. Instead, it was a decentralized network of madrasas, schools, libraries, and private scholarly houses. Students would move between different teachers, seeking out experts in specific fields. It was a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure education, where you curated your own curriculum based on the best minds available. This fluid, adaptive system allowed for incredible specialization and cross-pollination of ideas. A student might study the movements of Jupiter with one master, then move to another to learn the intricacies of Islamic jurisprudence. This dynamic environment fostered vigorous debates and intellectual discourse. Scholars didn't just passively absorb knowledge, they challenged it, refined it, and pushed its boundaries. Imagine walking past an open courtyard and hearing the impassioned voices of two scholars, one arguing for a geocentric model of the universe based on ancient texts, and another presenting calculations that suggested a different, perhaps more heliocentric understanding based on their own observations. These weren't quiet, polite discussions. These were intellectual, gladiatorial matches, all in the name of seeking truth. You can almost feel the energy, the hum of intellectual activity, even through the veil of centuries. The desert wind still whispers, but now it carries not just sand, but the echoes of profound ideas of minds reaching for the stars right here in this seemingly desolate place. Timbuktu wasn't boring. It was a vibrant, pulsating heart of knowledge, a place where the human spirit soared on the wings of curiosity. You felt the desert wind and glimpsed the intellectual energy. But now let's talk about the beating heart of Timbuktu's scholarly prowess, its Books. Not just books as objects, but as vessels of knowledge, as treasures more valuable than the gold that passed through the city's markets. Imagine a time before the internet, before printing presses, even before widespread literacy. In such an era, a handwritten manuscript was an incredibly precious commodity, painstakingly produced, carefully preserved, and revered almost as a living entity. When you walk into one of Timbuktu's many libraries, which remember were often private collections or attached to mosques and madrasas rather than grand public institutions, you aren't greeted by hushed silence and perfectly aligned shelves. Instead, you might find scholars poring over text in dimly lit courtyards. The pages sometimes brittle with age, the ink faded, but the words within still vibrant with centuries of wisdom. These weren't just religious texts, though the Quran and its commentaries formed a foundational core. No, these were encyclopedias of knowledge treatises on medicine, law, ethics, poetry, logic, geography, and crucially for our journey, astronomy and mathematics. The sheer volume of these manuscripts is astounding. Mainstream historical fact. It's estimated that at its peak, Timbuktu contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, possibly even 1 million. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a small collection. It was a vast intellectual reservoir, a testament to a civilization's dedication to preserving and advancing knowledge. Many of these texts were copied and recopied by generations of scribes, a venerable profession in Timbuktu. These were not just clerical workers, they were artists and custodians, meticulously transcribing every letter, often adding intricate illuminations and calligraphic flourishes. It was a slow, painstaking process requiring immense patience and skill. One error could propagate through countless future copies, making their work both critical and revered. You can almost hear the scratch of the reed pens on parchment, the rustle of vellum, the faint scent of ink and aged paper, mingling with the desert air. It's easy to romanticize, but imagine the discipline. Hours upon hours hunched over a desk, copying line after line. It makes your modern-day typing feel like a frantic sprint, doesn't it? Perhaps a scribe, after a particularly long session, might have quipped, "My hand aches, but at least I'm preserving knowledge for future generations." Unlike that guy who just invented a new way to fold a turban. What good is that going to do posterity, I kid, of course. Turban folding was probably a highly respected art. A quirky tidbit about these manuscripts, many of them contain colophons, little notes at the end of the text added by the scribe. These weren't just about who copied it and when. Some scribes would include personal anecdotes, prayers, or even laments about the difficulty of the task or the quality of the original they were copying. Imagine finding a note from a 15th century scribe complaining about a particularly thorny passage on lunar eclipses. May Allah forgive the original author, for their handwriting is worse than a camel's scratchings in the sand. These little human touches make the ancient texts feel remarkably immediate and relatable. The value of these books was immense. They were often traded, inherited, or even used as collateral for loans. Owning a significant collection of manuscripts was a mark of immense wealth and prestige. It wasn't just about the information they contained. It was about the physical object itself, a testament to craftsmanship and intellectual endeavor. This meant that the security of these collections was paramount. Owners would often build hidden chambers or even bury portions of their libraries during times of conflict, a testament to how fiercely they guarded their intellectual heritage. This brings us to a crucial point: the fragility of knowledge. For all their reverence, these books were vulnerable to the elements, to insects, and most devastatingly, to human conflict. Historians still argue whether the sheer number of lost manuscripts due to these factors outweighs the text that miraculously survived. The dry desert climate, while harsh, was paradoxically a blessing for preservation, often preventing the decay that moisture would cause in other regions. But even the desert couldn't protect against everything. The manuscripts covered a surprisingly diverse range of subjects. While Islamic theology and law were central, you'd find detailed works on Arabic, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and a strong emphasis on the practical sciences. For our purposes, the mathematical and astronomical texts are particularly fascinating. These weren't just abstract theories. They were practical guides for calculating prayer times, determining the precise direction of Mecca, or navigating the vast expanses of the desert by the stars. They integrated knowledge from across the Islamic world, drawing on Greek Indian and Persian scholarship, synthesizing it with local observations and insights. You're walking through this intellectual landscape, a landscape where a book wasn't just paper and ink, but a living connection to the minds of the past. You feel the weight of that history, the immense effort and dedication that went into creating and preserving this incredible legacy. It makes you wonder how much hidden knowledge still lies buried, waiting to be unearthed, or perhaps lost to the sands of time forever. It's a sobering thought, but also an inspiring one, reminding us of the enduring power of the written word. You felt the desert's call and the reverence for manuscripts, but now let's focus on the individuals who breathed life into Timbuktu's intellectual pulse, the scholars themselves. And among them, a particularly fascinating group were those who didn't just read books, but read the heavens, the astronomers. You might picture them as dusty old men hunched over ancient texts, but these were dynamic, curious minds, often polymaths, who delved into a startling array of subjects. Forget the stereotype of the cloistered monk. The scholars of Timbuktu were often well-traveled, worldly individuals who had journeyed across the vast Islamic world from Andalusia to Baghdad, absorbing knowledge and bringing it back to their desert university. They weren't just mullahs focused solely on religious doctrine. Many were deeply immersed in secular sciences, believing that understanding the natural world, including the cosmos, was a path to understanding the divine. It was a holistic approach to knowledge where faith and reason weren't seen as opposing forces, but as complementary paths. Imagine meeting one of these scholars. Perhaps he's a dignified elder with a twinkle in his eye, or a younger, eager student, both sharing an insatiable curiosity about the universe. They wouldn't be wearing star-spangled robes or pointy hats. More likely practical flowing desert attire, designed to keep them cool in the searing heat and warm during the chilly desert nights. They'd likely be debating the latest observations of Saturn or discussing the intricacies of calculating the direction of Mecca from thousands of miles away. It's easy to forget that these were real people with human emotions, frustrations, and moments of profound insight. A mainstream historical fact, many of the prominent scholars in Timbuktu held prestigious positions not only as teachers and religious leaders, but also as advisors to rulers and merchants. Their expertise in areas like calendar-making, navigation, and even predicting auspicious times for major undertakings made them invaluable. This wasn't just abstract academic pursuit. It had very real practical applications that underpinned the prosperity and spiritual life of the empire. So if you were a busy merchant planning a major caravan journey across the Sahara, you'd absolutely consult a scholar about the best time to depart based on celestial alignments and weather patterns. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Timbuktu astronomers were said to use carefully constructed water clocks that relied on the subtle flow of water through a small aperture illuminated by moonlight to precisely measure the passage of time during their nighttime observations. The flickering reflections of the moon on the water's surface provided a surprisingly accurate, if poetic, visual timer. Historians still argue whether the precision of these water clocks was truly superior to other methods of the time, or if it was more about the meditative ritual of observing them, but it certainly adds a mystical layer to their meticulous work. The intellectual environment encouraged collaboration and spirited debate. You wouldn't find them working in isolated silos. Picture groups of scholars gathering in courtyards under the brilliant stars, perhaps with a gentle breeze rustling through date palms, their voices hushed but animated as they shared their latest observations. Did you see the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter last night, one might ask? Astounding. My calculations suggested it would be even closer. And another might retort, but did you account for the subtle parallax shift observed from the oasis? It throws your whole model off by a fraction of a degree. Just a friendly academic rivalry, of course. No sand fights. Probably. These astronomers weren't just passively recording data. They were actively engaged in interpreting it, often trying to reconcile observed phenomena with existing cosmological models, many of which had been inherited from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions through the rich tapestry of Islamic scholarship. This meant grappling with complex geocentric models where Earth was at the center, even as their precise observations sometimes hinted at anomalies that modern science would later explain with heliocentric models. Imagine the intellectual wrestling match. My observations show X, but the established theory states Y. How do I make these two get along without, being ostracized by my peers? Their passion for the cosmos wasn't just intellectual. It was deeply emotional. You can imagine the awe they must have felt staring up at the Milky Way, a shimmering river of stars stretching across the desert sky. It's the same feeling you might get looking at the Grand Canyon or a majestic mountain range. That profound sense of wonder and insignificance, yet also connection to something grander than yourself. They sought not just to name the stars, but to understand their purpose, their dance, their influence. So when you think of Timbuktu, don't just think of dusty books. Think of the brilliant minds who pored over them, who challenged existing knowledge, and who spent countless quiet nights gazing at the heavens, trying to unlock the universe's secrets. They were the original stargazers, and their legacy still shines, even if sometimes faintly, like a distant star obscured by the passage of time. You've been introduced to the astronomers themselves, those remarkable individuals who peered into the night. Now let's get down to the brass tacks. What exactly were they doing up there, staring at the celestial tapestry? It wasn't just for poetic musings, though they certainly indulged in those. The celestial maps and astronomical calculations created in Timbuktu had immensely practical applications, deeply woven into the fabric of daily life and religious observance. Think about it. In a time before GPS, before precise mechanical clocks, how did you know when to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca? How did you navigate vast featureless deserts? How did you know the optimal time to plant crops or when religious festivals would occur? The answer for the people of Timbuktu lay in the stars and the meticulous work of their astronomers. One of the most critical applications was determining prayer times and the Qibla. Muslims pray 5 times a day, and the timing of these prayers is dictated by the position of the sun. Dawn, midday, afternoon, sunset, and nightfall all require precise timing. More importantly, every prayer must face the Qibla, the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. For someone in Timbuktu, thousands of kilometers away, figuring out that exact direction required sophisticated spherical trigonometry and accurate knowledge of latitude and longitude. The astronomers of Timbuktu developed intricate tables and methods to calculate these times and directions, with remarkable accuracy, often compiling comprehensive prayer calendars that could be distributed throughout the region. It was like having a super precise, living, breathing atomic clock for the entire community. Another vital application was navigation. Imagine a caravan master responsible for hundreds of camels and vast quantities of precious goods traversing the featureless Sahara. There are no signposts, no roads, just endless dunes. How do you find your way? By the stars, of course. Timbuktu's astronomers created star charts and taught navigation techniques based on the positions of constellations like Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Polaris, the North Star, which served as celestial compasses. They could teach a caravan leader how to determine their latitude by observing the height of Polaris above the horizon, or how to maintain a bearing by keeping certain stars at a fixed angle. One could imagine a seasoned caravaneer with a wry smile telling a young recruit, "Forget your fancy maps, son. The desert's a canvas, and the stars are your paint-by-numbers kit. Just try not to paint yourself into a sand dune." Mainstream historical fact. The astronomical knowledge of Timbuktu was so advanced that it included methods for calculating eclipses, both solar and lunar, and predicting the appearance of the new crescent moon, which was crucial for determining the start and end of Islamic months, particularly for Ramadan and the Eid festivals. These predictions weren't just academic exercises. They were deeply integrated into the religious and social fabric of the community. Getting the start of Ramadan wrong could be a significant religious and social faux pas, making these astronomers the unsung heroes of communal harmony. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Timbuktu scholars are said to have used the concept of shadow sticks, simple vertical rods, not just for basic timekeeping during the day, but for more complex astronomical calculations at twilight. By precisely measuring the length and angle of the shadows cast by specific celestial bodies at precise moments, they could refine their understanding of planetary positions and even the Earth's tilt. It's like turning a backyard game of "what time is it" by the sun into a sophisticated scientific instrument, but without the laser pointers and fancy apps. Historians still argue whether the accuracy of these methods was truly revolutionary, or if they were more about reinforcing existing knowledge through direct observation. Beyond the purely practical, there was also a strong current of astrology, or what we might now call archaeoastronomy, focusing on the cultural beliefs tied to celestial events. While not strictly scientific in the modern sense, the belief that celestial alignments could influence earthly events was pervasive. Scholars might consult star charts to advise rulers on auspicious times for battles, marriages, or major construction projects. This intertwining of practical science and mystical interpretation was common across many ancient cultures, and Timbuktu was no exception. It's a reminder that the line between science and what we might now call superstition was often much blurrier in historical contexts. The ability to accurately predict the seasons and agricultural cycles was also paramount in a region dependent on rain-fed agriculture. While the desert is vast, there are areas where seasonal rains allowed for cultivation, and knowing precisely when to sow and when to harvest was a matter of survival. The sun's path across the sky, the length of days, and the subtle shifts in star patterns all provided vital clues interpreted and disseminated by the astronomers. So when you consider Timbuktu's stargazers, don't just imagine them lost in abstract thought. Picture them as integral members of their society, providing the essential temporal and spatial framework that allowed a thriving civilization to function spiritually, economically, and socially. Their celestial maps weren't just pretty pictures. They were the blueprints for life in the desert. You've seen the practical uses of their astronomical knowledge, but how did the stargazers of Timbuktu actually do it? They weren't just squinting at the sky and making educated guesses. They employed a fascinating array of instruments of infinite reach. Tools that, while perhaps simple by modern standards, were marvels of ingenuity and precision for their time. Forget your gleaming brass telescopes and digital readouts. These instruments were crafted from wood, metal, and deep understanding. One of the most fundamental tools and a mainstream historical fact was the astrolabe. Now, if you've never seen an astrolabe picture, a beautiful, intricate brass disc often engraved with celestial coordinates and scales with movable parts that pivot and slide. It looks a bit like a steampunk pocket watch, but infinitely more complex. The astrolabe was a multi-purpose device, a sort of ancient analog computer. With it, an astronomer could determine the time of day or night, calculate the precise position of celestial bodies, figure out the direction of Mecca, and even solve complex problems of spherical astronomy. It was the Swiss Army knife of ancient astronomy, allowing them to measure angles, track stars, and even cast horoscopes for those who dabbled in the less scientific side of things. Imagine holding one of these in your hand, feeling the weight of centuries of knowledge and trying to fathom how much information this single elegant device could unlock. But it wasn't just astrolabes. They also utilized simpler yet equally effective instruments. Take the quadrant, for instance. This was essentially a quarter circle marked with degrees, often with a plumb bob hanging from its center to ensure it was perfectly vertical. By sighting a star or the sun along one edge and reading the angle on the scale, they could determine the altitude of that celestial body. It sounds straightforward, but achieving precision with a handheld device in the dark, often in windy conditions, was a testament to their skill. You could almost hear an astronomer muttering, "Just hold still, wind. I'm trying to calculate the moon's declination here, not fly a kite." A quirky tidbit that brings these instruments to life. Some Timbuktu astronomers are believed to have incorporated finely polished obsidian mirrors into their observation setups. These dark, reflective surfaces angled just so would allow them to observe the sun's position, indirectly protecting their eyes while still capturing precise measurements of its altitude or the length of shadows. It was a low-tech, ingenious solution to a very real problem, a bit like creating your own DIY welding mask out of natural materials. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these mirrors was safety, or whether they provided a unique clarity for pinpointing solar features. The cognomen, often just a simple vertical stick or pillar, was another essential tool. By observing the length and direction of its shadow throughout the day, they could determine local noon, the cardinal directions, and even the time of year. For more accurate measurements, they would sometimes use large, precisely constructed gnomons, effectively turning an entire courtyard into a giant sundial. This seemingly basic tool provided foundational data for their more complex calculations, like an ancient version of a global positioning satellite, just without the satellites or the globe. It's easy to look back with modern eyes and think these instruments were primitive. But for their time, they were at the cutting edge of technology. The craftsmanship required to produce an accurate astrolabe, with its intricate engravings and precise alignments, was immense. It wasn't just about scientific knowledge, it was about the skilled artisans who could translate that knowledge into tangible tools. The development and refinement of these instruments weren't static. Scholars in Timbuktu were constantly adapting and improving upon designs brought from other parts of the Islamic world or even inventing their own. This iterative process of observation, calculation, and instrument refinement was a hallmark of their scientific method. They weren't afraid to experiment, to try new approaches, to push the boundaries of what was known. Imagine the satisfaction of an astronomer after a long night of observations, meticulously adjusting their astrolabe, checking their quadrant, and finally arriving at a new, more precise measurement of a planetary position. It's that feeling of discovery, of unlocking a tiny piece of the universe's vast puzzle that drove them. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about the sheer intellectual thrill of it. Perhaps one would joke to a colleague, "My new quadrant is so accurate, I think I just found a star that was too shy to show itself before." These instruments, whether simple sticks or complex astrolabes, represent the tangible connection between the minds of Timbuktu's stargazers and the cosmos they so passionately studied. They remind us that even without modern technology, human ingenuity and relentless curiosity can bridge vast distances and unlock profound secrets. You've imagined the tools, the dedicated astronomers, and the practical demands that drove their celestial pursuits. But lurking beneath every star chart, every calculated prayer time, and every precisely measured shadow was the silent, often invisible language of the universe. Mathematics. In Timbuktu, mathematics wasn't just a dry academic subject. It was the key that unlocked the cosmos, the intricate code that allowed scholars to comprehend the grand dance of planets and stars. For these stargazers, a deep understanding of numbers, geometry, and algebra wasn't just helpful. It was absolutely essential. You couldn't build an accurate astrolabe without precise geometric calculations. You couldn't predict an eclipse without understanding complex algorithms for planetary motion. And you certainly couldn't determine the Qibla from thousands of miles away without mastering spherical trigonometry, a particularly brain-bending branch of math that deals with triangles on the surface of a sphere like our Earth. It makes your high school algebra feel like finger painting, doesn't it? Think of a bustling Timbuktu market overflowing with goods. Merchants would use basic arithmetic daily, counting their profits and haggling over prices. But the astronomers, they were operating on an entirely different plane. They were grappling with concepts that stretched the very limits of human understanding, using numbers to model the unseen forces that governed the universe. They were the original data scientists, just with less fancy software and more parchment. One mainstream historical fact that often surprises people is the significant advancements in algebra and trigonometry that occurred in the Islamic world long before similar developments in Europe. Timbuktu, as a hub of Islamic scholarship, directly benefited from and contributed to this rich mathematical tradition. Scholars in Timbuktu were not just consumers of this knowledge, they were active participants in its refinement. They studied the works of scholars like al-Khwarizmi, who gave us the term algorithm and laid the foundations for algebra as we know it, and al-Battani, whose trigonometric tables were remarkably accurate. They'd meticulously copy, analyze, and apply these groundbreaking mathematical texts. Imagine a scholar late at night, a single oil lamp flickering, illuminating complex equations on a scroll. He's not just solving for X, he's solving for the position of Mars next month, or the exact moment of a lunar eclipse. The stakes were high. Religious observances, safe caravan travel, even the ruler's astrological advice depended on the accuracy of these numbers. It's enough to give anyone a mild panic attack, especially if your only calculator is your own brilliant mind and a stylus. You can almost hear the soft scratching of his pen, punctuated perhaps by a muttered expletive when a calculation goes awry. By the beard of the prophet, where did that cosine go? Now, for a quirky tidbit, some mathematical texts found in Timbuktu contain surprisingly complex algorithms for generating magic squares, which are grids of numbers where the sum of each row column and diagonal is the same. While seemingly a recreational pursuit, the study of magic squares was often intertwined with deeper mathematical principles, including number theory, and sometimes even had mystical or talismanic associations. Historians still argue whether the creation of these complex magic squares was purely an intellectual exercise or if they were seen as having practical applications in some form of numerology or even cryptography. It's like finding out your calculus professor was also secretly a master Sudoku player, but on an infinitely more advanced level. The mathematical insights weren't always neatly separated from other disciplines. For instance, the need to calculate the Qibla, as we discussed, spurred significant advancements in spherical geometry. They needed to plot points and distances on a globe, not just a flat plane. This led to sophisticated techniques for measuring angles and distances on a curved surface, which had implications far beyond religious practice, potentially aiding in cartography and even theoretical physics if they'd had the chance to develop it further. Scholars were masters of how numerical notation. While they didn't use our modern decimal point system in exactly the same way, they worked with fractions and intricate systems for representing large numbers. The precision they achieved with these methods, often relying on mental arithmetic and meticulously maintained tables, is truly astonishing. It makes you realize how much we take our calculators and computers for granted. Could you predict a planetary orbit with just a quill and some sand for scratch paper? Probably not without a lot of very patient instruction. The interconnectedness of mathematics and astronomy also fostered a rigorous approach to data collection and analysis. When you're observing celestial bodies night after night, you're generating a massive amount of raw data. To make sense of it, to discern patterns and predict future events, you need sophisticated mathematical tools to process and interpret that information. They were charting deviations, looking for anomalies, and constantly refining their models based on new observations. It was an ongoing scientific endeavor, driven by the desire for ultimate precision. So when you think of the quiet nights in Timbuktu, don't just picture the stars. Picture the numbers, the equations, the intricate web of mathematical thought that stretched from the sand underfoot to the furthest reaches of the observable universe. It was here, in the heart of the desert, that the silent language of mathematics was spoken fluently, allowing humans to truly converse with the cosmos. You've delved into the deep mathematical currents that flowed beneath Timbuktu's stargazing. Now let's widen our gaze to how these profound ideas, these scientific and philosophical breakthroughs, actually arrived in the desert city. It wasn't just magic carpets, you know. It was primarily through the bustling, relentless flow of trade routes, the ancient superhighways of commerce and culture that stitched together vast swathes of the medieval world. These weren't just paths for gold and salt. They were vital conduits for the exchange of ideas. Imagine the Silk Road, but stretched across the Sahara. These were perilous journeys, fraught with dangers from bandits to sandstorms, but the rewards were immense. Merchants often accompanied by scholars, Sufi mystics, and even intrepid adventurers would brave these routes, carrying not just physical goods, but intellectual cargo. A scroll containing a new commentary on Euclid's Elements might travel alongside a caravan laden with gold from Wangara, or a newly translated Arabic text on Indian astronomy could be tucked away in the saddlebag next to bags of rock salt from Tahaza. This constant movement meant that Timbuktu, far from being isolated, was remarkably connected to the broader Islamic world, to the intellectual powerhouses of Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba. Mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's libraries contained works by scholars from across this vast geographical and intellectual landscape, demonstrating a truly global, for its time exchange of knowledge. The Malian Empire, which Timbuktu was a part of, actively encouraged these connections, understanding that intellectual vibrancy contributed to overall prosperity and prestige. They understood that knowledge like gold was a form of wealth. Consider the journey of a single idea. Perhaps a new method for calculating planetary longitudes, developed in Baghdad by a Persian astronomer. This idea would be written down, copied by scribes, and then slowly, painstakingly travel westward. It might pass through scholars in Cairo, then perhaps Fez, eventually making its way down to Timbuktu. Along the way, it would be discussed, debated, perhaps refined, and then taught in the local madrasas. It's like an ancient version of a viral intellectual meme, spreading slowly but powerfully across continents. You can almost hear a scholar in Timbuktu excitedly telling a colleague, "Have you seen this new treatise from Baghdad? Their methods for predicting lunar phases are simply divine. No, not divine, as in from God, but divine as in really, really good, with a subtle, gentle sarcasm, of course." A quirky tidbit that highlights this exchange: it's believed that some of the highly accurate astronomical tables used in Timbuktu actually incorporated knowledge derived from ancient Egyptian and even pre-Islamic West African sky observations. Filtered through centuries of Islamic scholarship, while the primary intellectual currents came from the East and North, local astronomical traditions weren't entirely discarded, but subtly blended into the larger framework. Historians still argue whether this integration was conscious or merely an incidental absorption of existing knowledge, but it showcases a fascinating intellectual syncretism. It's like discovering that your favorite modern pop song has a subtle, almost unnoticeable sample from an ancient folk tune. The traders themselves, though primarily focused on commerce, played an unwitting but crucial role in this intellectual diffusion. They funded the journeys, created the demand for the goods that justified the travel, and often carried messages and even specific requests for texts between scholars in different cities. Imagine a merchant being asked, "Oh, and if you happen to pass through Cairo, could you pick up the latest commentary on Ibn al-Haytham's optics? I hear it's quite illuminating." Yes, another pun. They keep you awake, don't they? Or perhaps they lull you further into a comfortable chuckle. This dynamic flow of ideas meant that Timbuktu was not just a recipient of knowledge, it was also a contributor. Its scholars, after absorbing and synthesizing information from across the Islamic world, would then generate their own treatises, their own commentaries, and their own unique observations, which would then flow back along those same trade routes to other intellectual centers. It was a two-way street, a vibrant intellectual conversation spanning continents. The presence of diverse communities within Timbuktu itself also fostered this intellectual exchange. Alongside the local Songhai and Tuareg populations, there were significant numbers of Arab, Berber, and even Jewish communities, all bringing their own unique perspectives, languages, and intellectual traditions. This cultural melting pot created a fertile ground for new ideas to germinate and flourish. It was a place where different ways of seeing the world could collide, leading to fresh insights and innovations. So when you picture the silent, expansive desert, Don't just see empty dunes. See the invisible network of roads woven by generations of merchants and scholars carrying the lifeblood of knowledge across vast distances. It was this intricate web of trade routes that allowed the brilliance of Timbuktu's stargazers to connect with and contribute to the wider world of human understanding. The stars may be infinite, but the paths to understanding them in those days often began with a camel train and a thirst for both commerce and enlightenment. You've charted the routes by which knowledge flowed into Timbuktu. Now let's consider the quiet, diligent hands that actually preserved that knowledge, the scribes. These weren't just glorified copy machines. They were the unsung heroes of intellectual history, meticulously preserving, copying, and disseminating the texts that formed the bedrock of Timbuktu's scholarly reputation. Imagine a world without printing presses, where every single book had to be written out letter by painstaking letter by hand. That was the world of the Timbuktu scribe, a world of immense patience and profound dedication. These scribes, often scholars themselves, were highly respected members of society. Their work was not merely mechanical. It required deep understanding of the texts they were copying, impeccable handwriting, and often artistic flair for calligraphy and illumination. A single mistake could ripple through generations of copies, making their task one of immense responsibility. It was akin to a modern-day software engineer debugging complex code, but with ink and parchment instead of keyboards and screens. Oh, blast a misplaced dot. Now the entire astronomical calculation for the next decade will be off by a hair. The shame, the utter shame. Okay, maybe not that dramatic, but you get the idea. Precision was paramount. Mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu was famous for its numerous scriptoriums, places where scribes worked, and for the family lineages of scribes who passed down their skills and knowledge through generations. Some families specialized in particular types of texts like legal documents, religious commentaries, or, crucially for our story, scientific and astronomical treatises. This specialization meant a high degree of accuracy and a consistent style, making their copies highly valued across the region. It was like having specialized publishing houses, each with its unique expertise and brand of quality. Think of the physical act of their work. You're sitting in a quiet, perhaps sun-dappled courtyard, the desert heat kept at bay by thick mud brick walls. Before you lies a stack of carefully prepared parchment or paper, which, by the way, arrived in Timbuktu via those very trade routes, often from Egypt or even further east. You dip your reed pen into a small inkwell, the ink often made from local plant extracts and soot, and begin to meticulously form each Arabic letter. The rhythm would be almost meditative dip, right, line after line, page after page, sometimes for hours on end. It makes your most tedious administrative task feel like a whirlwind vacation, doesn't it? A quirky tidbit that adds to their mystique. Some scribes would subtly incorporate tiny, almost invisible signature marks or unique flourishes into their calligraphy, not just as a personal touch, but sometimes as a way to subtly distinguish their copies from forgeries or less accurate versions. These were like ancient watermarks, a testament to their pride in their craft, and a subtle assertion of their intellectual property in a world without copyright law. Historians still argue whether these subtle marks were purely aesthetic or had a more practical purpose for authentication. It's like finding a hidden symbol in a classical painting that only the most discerning eyes can spot. The scribes weren't just passive copiers. Often, if they encountered a particularly difficult or ambiguous passage in an astronomical text, they might consult with a scholar or even add a marginal note themselves, pointing out a discrepancy or suggesting an alternative interpretation. This proactive engagement meant they weren't just preserving information. They were part of the ongoing intellectual conversation, albeit from the quiet confines of their scriptoria. They were peer reviewers before peer review was a formal thing. The materials they used were also a testament to resourcefulness. While some texts were on expensive imported paper, many were on local parchment or even dried and treated animal skins. The ink, too, would be made from locally available pigments. This self-sufficiency allowed for the mass production of texts even in a remote desert city, and it's a powerful reminder that ingenuity isn't dependent on cutting-edge technology, but on clever application of available resources. The sheer volume of text produced and preserved speaks volumes about the value placed on the written word. A manuscript wasn't just a book. It was an investment, a legacy, a piece of cultural heritage. When times were troubled, as they often were in a region prone to political upheaval, the first things people would try to save after their families were their precious manuscripts. Stories abound of scholars and scribes bravely smuggling their libraries out of the city under cover of darkness to protect them from invading forces. It's the ultimate expression of how much they cherished intellectual knowledge. More than gold, more than possessions, almost as much as life itself. So next time you pick up a book, any book, take a moment to appreciate the quiet, patient work of the scribes who, for centuries, were the only guardians of human knowledge. In Timbuktu, under the vast starry sky, these dedicated individuals ensured that the whispers of the cosmos, meticulously observed and recorded, would not be lost to the shifting sands of time. Their legacy is literally written into the pages of history. You've seen the rigorous science, the meticulous scribes, and the formal libraries, but to truly understand how Timbuktu engaged with the heavens, we need to acknowledge another powerful force: oral traditions. For centuries before the widespread adoption of writing, and even alongside it, knowledge in West African societies was transmitted, preserved, and celebrated through storytelling, epic poems, songs, and proverbs. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were living encyclopedias carrying the wisdom of generations, including profound sky stories. Imagine sitting around a crackling fire in a desert encampment, the stars blazing overhead. An elder, perhaps a griot, a traditional storyteller and historian, begins to speak. His voice is deep and rhythmic, weaving tales of creation, of heroes, and of the celestial bodies themselves. These aren't dry scientific lectures. They are vibrant narratives that explain the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, often imbuing them with spiritual significance and moral lessons. The constellations aren't just patterns of light. They are characters in a grand cosmic drama, their positions signaling seasons, guiding journeys, and even foretelling events. Mainstream historical fact. Many West African cultures possessed rich and sophisticated oral traditions concerning astronomy, often relating celestial phenomena to agricultural cycles, navigation, and even social structures. These traditions existed long before the arrival of written Arabic scholarship and continued to thrive alongside it. The astronomical knowledge within these oral traditions, while sometimes expressed metaphorically, often contained remarkably accurate observations passed down through countless generations. For instance, stories about the chasing of certain stars across the sky could represent the apparent movement of constellations over seasons. A quirky tidbit that beautifully illustrates this blend: in some Malian oral traditions, the Milky Way was often described not just as a river of stars, but as the river of souls, or the path of ancestors, along which the spirits of the departed journeyed. Certain prominent stars or constellations were believed to be the homes of specific deities or ancestral spirits influencing events on Earth. Historians still argue whether these spiritual interpretations were purely metaphorical, or if they sometimes informed or even subtly influenced the more scientific observations of Timbuktu's scholars, creating a unique synthesis of belief and empiricism. It's like listening to a perfectly composed piece of music that seamlessly blends ancient folk melodies with modern orchestral arrangements. The beauty of oral tradition is its adaptability and accessibility. Not everyone could read or write, but everyone could listen. Knowledge, particularly practical knowledge like telling time by the stars or predicting seasonal changes, could be disseminated widely through these narratives. A farmer might not know the intricate mathematics of a lunar calendar, but he would know the story of the harvest moon and what its appearance signified for his crops. The scholars of Timbuktu, while steeped in written tradition, were not isolated from these oral currents. Many would have grown up hearing these very stories. They might have seen them as cultural expressions, or perhaps, in some cases, even as a rudimentary form of astronomical data, needing to be formalized and refined through written calculation. There was a continuous, subtle interplay between the two forms of knowledge, enriching the intellectual landscape of the city. It wasn't a rigid either-or situation. It was a fascinating both-and. Consider how oral traditions might have aided in pattern recognition. Before complex instruments, generations of observing the same celestial patterns and recounting them through stories would build a communal understanding of rhythms and cycles. The repetition inherent in oral transmission reinforces memory and accuracy, ensuring that crucial information, like the predictable paths of certain planets or the recurrence of meteor showers, was passed down reliably. It's like crowdsourcing astronomical data, but with ancient narrators instead of satellites. These sky stories weren't just passive observations. They often contained subtle but powerful lessons about human humility in the face of the vast cosmos, the interconnectedness of all things, and the importance of observation and respect for natural cycles. They taught patience, resilience, and the wisdom of living in harmony with the environment. It's a bit like getting your science lesson wrapped up in an emotionally resonant, deeply moving narrative, making it stick in your mind far more effectively than rote memorization. So as you imagine the quiet nights in Timbuktu, don't just see the scholars with their astrolabes and manuscripts. Hear the echoes of voices around ancient fires, telling tales of the sun's journey, the moon's phases, and the silent, shimmering river of stars that stretched across their desert home. The written word was mighty, but the spoken word, with its rhythm and heart, provided the foundational understanding and emotional connection to the universe, making the intellectual pursuits of the stargazers even richer and more profound. You've heard the sky stories and seen the dedication of the scribes. Now let's tie it all together. How did this profound celestial knowledge actually shape everyday life? In Timbuktu, it wasn't just abstract academic theory. The rhythms of the cosmos permeated nearly every aspect of daily existence, from the mundane tasks of farming to the most sacred religious observances. You wouldn't think of stargazing as being intimately connected to say whether you had enough food on your plate, but in Timbuktu it absolutely was. Consider the bedrock of any society: agriculture. In a region where rainfall is scarce and unpredictable, knowing the precise timing of the seasons was a matter of survival. The sun's path across the sky, the changing length of daylight hours, and the appearance and disappearance of certain constellations throughout the year provided vital clues for farmers. Mainstream historical fact: The astronomical knowledge of Timbuktu scholars was used to create highly accurate agricultural calendars, advising communities on the optimal times for planting specific crops, preparing irrigation systems, and harvesting. Imagine a village elder consulting with a scholar saying, "The Pleiades rise indicates it's time to sow the millet." Yes, it was like having a cosmic weather forecast, but infinitely more reliable than your local meteorologist's predictions. Just kidding, mostly. Don't cancel your umbrella just yet. Beyond agriculture, there was the constant, omnipresent rhythm of religious life. As we touched upon earlier, determining the precise 5 daily prayer times required continuous astronomical observation and calculation. The adhan, the call to prayer echoing across the city, was a direct consequence of understanding the sun's position. Imagine the muezzin high atop a minaret, not just guessing, but knowing with scientific certainty the exact moment to call the faithful to prayer, guided by the very stars and sun we've been discussing. It imbued everyday religious practice with a deep sense of precision and connection to the divine order of the universe. And of course, the most anticipated religious event, the holy month of Ramadan, depended entirely on the sighting of the new crescent moon. This wasn't a casual observation. It was a communal event, often led by scholars. Getting it right was crucial for the entire community. One could imagine the tension and excitement on a clear night, everyone gazing westward, hoping to be the first to spot that elusive sliver of light heralding the start of a sacred month. It must have been quite the atmospheric moment, especially if you were hosting dinner, and someone kept shouting, "Is that it? Is that the moon? No, wait, that's just a particularly bright dust bunny." Navigation was another crucial aspect of daily life, particularly for the caravans that form the city's economic lifeline. While we covered it earlier, it bears repeating how fundamental stellar navigation was for these long, arduous journeys across the featureless Sahara. Without the stars as guides, trade would have been far riskier, less efficient, and undoubtedly less frequent. The ability to travel safely meant economic prosperity, linking Timbuktu to the wider world and ensuring the flow of goods that sustained its population. The stars weren't just pretty, they were profitable. A quirky tidbit that blurs the lines between practical and poetic: some Timbuktu families, particularly those with long lineages of scholars or caravaneers, were said to maintain small private star gardens. These weren't for growing plants, but were carefully arranged patterns of stones or even subtle depressions in the sand designed to mirror specific constellations visible at key times of the year. They served as mnemonic devices for teaching the young about stellar patterns, almost like a tactile, earthly map of the heavens. Historians still argue whether these were primarily educational tools or if they held a deeper, perhaps ritualistic significance in connecting the earthly realm with the celestial. It's like having a miniature personal planetarium in your backyard, but made entirely of desert elements. Even the construction of buildings, particularly mosques and important public structures, was sometimes influenced by astronomical principles. Ensuring that prayer niches, mihrabs, faced precisely towards Mecca required advanced surveying techniques guided by celestial calculations. The alignment of doors and windows might also be subtly designed to capture specific sunrises or sunsets, integrating the architectural space with the cosmic rhythms. And let's not forget timekeeping itself. Beyond the broad strokes of prayer times, the ability to tell the hour or even fractions of an hour was important for daily routines, market activities, and legal proceedings. Sundials, water clocks, as previously mentioned, and observations of specific stars allowed for a more precise structuring of the day and night. It's a reminder that before wristwatches and smartphones, humans were incredibly adept at using their environment to organize their lives. So when you think about the quiet nights in Timbuktu, don't just envision scholars in libraries. Picture the farmers looking up at the sky for signs of rain, the caravaneers charting their course by the unwavering North Star, the entire community pausing 5 times a day, in unison, guided by the sun's silent journey. The cosmos wasn't just out there. It was interwoven with every breath, every task, every moment of life in this remarkable desert city. You've seen the stars woven into the very fabric of Timbuktu's daily life, a vibrant tapestry of knowledge and custom. But like all things, even the brightest stars eventually begin to dim. We now turn to a more somber chapter. The sunder of the silence. The slow, painful decline of Timbuktu's golden age, and with it the tragic loss of a significant portion of its unparalleled astronomical and intellectual heritage. For centuries, Timbuktu had thrived, a jewel in the desert, buoyed by its strategic location, its intellectual prowess, and a relatively stable political environment under the Songhai Empire. But empires like stars rise and fall. The late 16th century brought seismic shifts that would irrevocably alter Timbuktu's destiny. The primary catalyst for this decline, and a mainstream historical fact, was the Moroccan invasion of 1591. The Sultan of Morocco, Moulay Ahmad al-Mansur, driven by a desire to control the lucrative trans-Saharan gold trade and perhaps a thirst for glory, dispatched an army across the Sahara. This wasn't just any army. It was armed with firearms, including muskets and cannons, technologies that were largely absent in the Songhai Empire. The Battle of Tondibai, though militarily a decisive Moroccan victory, effectively shattered the Songhai Empire's power and ushered in a period of instability and foreign occupation. Imagine the chaos. The vibrant intellectual life which thrived on stability and patronage was suddenly plunged into turmoil. Scholars fled, libraries were looted, and the carefully cultivated networks of learning began to unravel. The delicate ecosystem that allowed for the painstaking work of stargazing, of copying manuscripts, and of engaging in complex debates was brutally disrupted. The quiet hum of intellectual activity was replaced by the clatter of swords and the shouts of soldiers. It was a cultural catastrophe. A bit like someone accidentally or intentionally unplugging the entire internet, only with far more devastating consequences for knowledge. The Moroccan occupation, which lasted for over 2 centuries, was not conducive to scholarly flourishing. The new rulers were often more interested in extracting resources than fostering intellectual growth. Without stable patronage, without the free flow of ideas and scholars, the madrasas and private libraries struggled. Many scholars, fearing persecution, or simply unable to continue their work in such an environment, either left Timbuktu or went underground guarding their precious manuscripts in secret. A quirky tidbit that underscores the personal toll of this period: there are accounts of scholars so desperate to protect their invaluable astronomical tables and rare cosmological treatises that they would meticulously bury them in the desert sand, marking the spots with subtle, easily overlooked landmarks, like unusual stone formations or specific desert plants. They hoped to return one day, or for future generations, to unearth these hidden treasures. Historians still argue whether the majority of lost manuscripts simply decayed in the desert or were deliberately hidden and then forgotten, but it speaks volumes about the lengths to which they went to preserve their legacy. It's like hiding your prized vinyl collection in a secret bunker because you know a barbarian horde is coming to smash your turntables. The trade routes themselves, the very arteries that had brought so much intellectual richness to Timbuktu also began to shift and decline. New maritime routes around Africa were developing, offering cheaper and safer ways to transport goods. This gradual economic decline further diminished Timbuktu's status and its ability to support a thriving scholarly class. Without the influx of new ideas and the financial stability to sustain learning, the intellectual wellspring began to dry up. The silence that descended upon Timbuktu wasn't absolute or immediate, but it was profound. The vibrant intellectual debates that once filled the courtyards faded into whispers. The meticulous astronomical observations became fewer and further between. The continuous chain of knowledge passed from master to student was broken in many places. It was a slow, agonizing process, like watching a magnificent constellation gradually fade from the night sky one star at a time. Historians still argue whether the decline was solely due to external pressures like the Moroccan invasion and shifting trade routes, or if internal factors such as increasing religious conservatism or a weakening of the intellectual impulse also played a significant role. It's a complex interplay of forces, as most historical declines are, but the impact on Timbuktu's scientific output, particularly in astronomy, was undeniably severe. You're standing at the edge of this tragic history, feeling the echoes of a once vibrant intellectual life, now reduced to a haunting quiet. The desert wind still whispers, but now it carries not just tales of wonder, but the mournful lament of lost knowledge, of shattered dreams, and of the brilliance that once shone so brightly, now tragically dimmed. The stargazers of Timbuktu, once so confident in their ability to chart the heavens, found themselves unable to chart their own city's path away from decline. You felt the chill of Timbuktu's decline, the tragic silence that fell over its scholarly pursuits. But even in the face of such loss, hope flickers like a distant star. For despite the centuries of neglect, conflict, and the relentless sand, many of the precious manuscripts' hidden journey would eventually lead them back into the light, revealing glimpses of the lost astronomical knowledge they contained. This is the story of their survival, often against incredible odds, and their eventual rediscovery. Imagine the sheer tenacity required to preserve these fragile documents. As the Moroccan invasion brought chaos, and as subsequent centuries saw waves of instability and foreign occupation, the owners of these manuscripts, the scholarly families, the imams, the private collectors, faced a stark choice: abandon their intellectual heritage or risk everything to save it. Mainstream historical fact: countless families in Timbuktu and the surrounding regions meticulously guarded their ancestral libraries, often passing down the responsibility through generations, some literally burying their collections in the desert or bricking them up in hidden walls to protect them from invaders and the elements. It's like a secret family recipe, but instead of delicious cookies, it's groundbreaking astronomical calculations. These acts of defiance and dedication were remarkable. You can picture a scholar under the cover of a moonless night, carefully wrapping precious scrolls in leather, perhaps sealing them in clay jars, and then burying them in a location only known to a trusted few. The risk was immense. Discovery could mean confiscation or worse. The hope, however, was that one day when peace returned, these treasures could be unearthed and their knowledge shared once more. It was a desperate gamble against the sands of time and the ravages of human conflict. A quirky tidbit that reveals the unexpected challenges some scholars, during times of extreme danger, would reportedly disperse their manuscripts, not just by burying them, but by entrusting individual volumes to nomadic Tuareg tribes. These fiercely independent desert dwellers, known for their deep knowledge of the Sahara, would carry the books far across the dunes sometimes for decades, acting as unwitting mobile libraries, safeguarding fragments of knowledge in their travels. Historians still argue whether this dispersal was a coordinated effort or simply opportunistic acts of preservation by individual families seeking help from the trusted allies, but it paints a romantic picture of intellectual survival in the most unlikely of hands. It's like a secret underground railroad for priceless literature powered by camels and courage. The long period of Timbuktu's obscurity meant that for centuries the extent of its intellectual wealth, particularly in sciences like astronomy, remained largely unknown to the outside world. European explorers and scholars only began to truly discover the existence of these vast private libraries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Their initial astonishment quickly turned to awe as they realized the sheer volume and diversity of texts, including many that predated or paralleled European scientific advancements. The rediscovery wasn't a single event, but a gradual process. Some families, upon finding a period of relative stability, would carefully unearth their collections. Others remained hidden for generations, only brought to light by chance or through the efforts of dedicated researchers and cultural preservationists in more recent times. The challenges of preserving these ancient, fragile manuscripts in a harsh desert environment were and remain immense. The dry air helps prevent mold, but it makes the parchment brittle, and insects and sand are constant threats. The 21st century has seen a concerted international effort to locate, preserve, digitize, and study these Timbuktu manuscripts. Organizations like the Timbuktu Manuscript Project and the work of institutions like the Ahmed Baba Institute are slowly, painstakingly bringing this heritage back to life. You can now browse digitized images of some of these texts online, including intricate astronomical tables and celestial charts, a testament to the power of modern technology to help bridge centuries of neglect. It's like finding a long-lost ancestor's meticulously kept diary and realizing they were secretly a brilliant astrophysicist. However, the journey isn't over. Political instability in Mali, particularly in recent decades, has once again put these treasures at risk. You might remember news reports from 2012 when extremist groups occupied Timbuktu and deliberately destroyed some Sufi shrines and manuscripts. This prompted another heroic, desperate effort by local librarians and citizens to smuggle thousands of manuscripts out of the city, literally in suitcases and on donkey carts, to safer locations. It was a race against time, a testament to the enduring human spirit's commitment to knowledge. So when you consider the quiet nights in Timbuktu and the knowledge of its stargazers, remember not just their brilliance, but the incredible resilience of their legacy. These manuscripts, carrying the whispers of the cosmos, embarked on journeys as perilous as any caravan, often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge and illuminate the quiet darkness once more. Their survival is a miracle, a testament to the profound human desire to keep knowledge alive no matter the cost. You've followed the harrowing journey of Timbuktu's manuscripts, marveling at their survival against incredible odds. Now let's fast forward from the whispers of the past to the increasingly vibrant voices of the present. Modern glimpses echoes past. In our current era, with new technologies and renewed scholarly interest, we are slowly but surely beginning to unearth and understand more about this forgotten astronomical legacy, piecing together the fragmented puzzle of Timbuktu's celestial insights. For a long time, the narrative of scientific discovery often centered on Europe, with other civilizations' contributions sometimes overlooked or downplayed. But in recent decades, there has been a significant and much-needed shift. Scholars from around the world are now diligently studying the Timbuktu manuscripts, applying modern analytical techniques to reveal the depth and sophistication of their scientific content. It's like finding a hidden wing in an old museum filled with masterpieces you never knew existed. Mainstream historical fact. The ongoing digitization projects, primarily led by institutions in Mali in collaboration with international partners, have allowed researchers globally to access high-resolution images of thousands of Timbuktu manuscripts. This accessibility is revolutionary, transforming what was once a limited field of study into a dynamic area of active research. No longer do you have to brave the desert yourself. You can explore these ancient texts from your comfy armchair and, say, Hanoi, coffee in hand. This means a wider range of experts. Historians of science, mathematicians, linguists, and astronomers can now collaborate, bringing diverse perspectives to bear on these complex documents. Imagine a modern scholar, perhaps in a quiet university office, staring at a computer screen. On it, a digital image of a 15th century Timbuktu manuscript, showing intricate tables of planetary positions. They might be cross-referencing these calculations with modern astronomical models, checking their accuracy or trying to understand the mathematical methods used. They might discover a subtle numerical technique previously thought to have originated in a different part of the world, or even an entirely new approach to an old problem. It's like forensic detective work, but for ancient science. You can almost hear the excited gasp when a breakthrough occurs. Eureka, or should I say, Ya Salam. This algorithm for lunar eclipses is truly groundbreaking. Yes, a little dramatic, but entirely justified when dealing with centuries-old genius. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the challenges and rewards of this modern research. Some of the astronomical diagrams in the Timbuktu manuscripts feature unique symbols or constellations that do not perfectly align with traditional Greco-Roman or Arabic constellations. Researchers are now hypothesizing that these might represent indigenous West African celestial observations and star lore subtly integrated into the more formal Islamic astronomical framework. Historians still argue whether these unique representations were the result of independent observation, regional variations, or a deliberate synthesis of different traditions, but it opens up a fascinating new avenue for understanding pre-colonial African astronomy. It's like finding a secret language hidden within a familiar text, revealing a deeper, richer meaning. The study of these manuscripts is not without its difficulties. Many are in fragile condition. The Arabic script can be challenging, and the scientific terminology often requires deep expertise in both medieval Arabic and the specific scientific conventions of the time. It's a bit like trying to read a medical textbook written in Shakespearean English, where half the words have changed meaning. But the rewards are immense. These modern glimpses are revealing that Timbuktu's scholars were not merely passive recipients of knowledge from other parts of the Islamic world. They were active participants making their own observations, refining existing theories, and contributing original insights. Their work on spherical trigonometry, for instance, shows a high degree of sophistication, and their astronomical tables are remarkably accurate for the period, demonstrating keen observational skills and advanced computational abilities. The understanding of Timbuktu's astronomical past also helps us to reconstruct a more complete and accurate global history of science. It challenges Eurocentric narratives and highlights the significant contributions of African and Islamic civilizations to human knowledge. It reminds us that scientific inquiry is a universal human endeavor, thriving in unexpected places and at unexpected times. So as you reflect on the stargazers of Timbuktu, Consider not only their ancient brilliance, but also the contemporary efforts to bring their legacy back into the light. The quiet nights in the desert may have given way to the hum of modern servers, but the echoes of their wisdom are growing stronger, reminding us that the pursuit of knowledge knows no boundaries of time or geography. The stars they charted are still there, and now, thanks to dedicated modern scholars, their charts are shining brightly once more. You've traveled from the initial whispers of the desert to the modern rediscovery of Timbuktu's celestial secrets. Now, as our journey through those quiet nights draws to a close, let's reflect on the enduring lesson of the Stargazers, a timeless truth that resonates across centuries, the profound and universal human quest to understand the universe, a quest that binds our distant past to our ever-unfolding future. It's all just stardust, timeless wisdom. From the earliest humans gazing up at the fiery rivers of the Milky Way, filled with awe and perhaps a little healthy fear to the scholars of Timbuktu, meticulously charting planetary movements, and to the astrophysicists of today launching telescopes into orbit, the fundamental impulse remains the same: to look up, to wonder, to question, and to seek meaning in the vastness beyond our world. The Stargazers of Timbuktu were a vital link in this unbroken chain of human curiosity. They remind us that the scientific spirit isn't confined to any one culture or era. It blossoms wherever human minds are free to observe, to think, and to dream. Mainstream historical fact, the foundational principles of celestial observation and mathematical astronomy, developed by ancient civilizations like the Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, and Chinese, were meticulously preserved, studied, and often advanced within the Islamic world, with Timbuktu playing a crucial, albeit often overlooked role in this grand intellectual relay race. They were not working in a vacuum. They were building upon the shoulders of giants, adding their own unique observations and refinements, and then in turn passing that knowledge forward. It's a testament to the cumulative nature of human knowledge, each generation adding a few more bricks to the towering edifice of understanding. A quirky tidbit that beautifully encapsulates this timeless connection: some contemporary astronomers, when calibrating their modern telescopes for optimal viewing of deep sky objects, sometimes refer to specific seeing conditions documented in anecdotal notes found within Timbuktu manuscripts. These ancient observations, describing periods of exceptional atmospheric clarity in the Sahara, are seen as remarkably consistent with modern meteorological data, suggesting a continuity of observational excellence across millennia. Historians still argue whether this cross-referencing is a testament to the scientific rigor of Timbuktu's observations or a fascinating coincidence, but it certainly offers a poetic link between their quiet nights and our own. Imagine their amazement if they knew their notes would still be useful centuries later. The stories of Timbuktu's stargazers teach us about resilience. Faced with the harsh realities of the desert, they built a thriving intellectual center. When faced with invasion and decline, they risked everything to save their precious knowledge. This enduring spirit, this tenacious dedication to learning, is perhaps their most profound legacy. It's a gentle whisper from the past, reminding us that knowledge, like the stars, can endure even through the longest, darkest nights. And what about those quiet nights themselves? They fostered a unique kind of contemplation. In the vast, silent expanse of the Sahara, under a sky ablaze with stars, it's impossible not to feel a sense of perspective. Your daily worries shrink to insignificance against the backdrop of swirling galaxies. The scholars of Timbuktu experienced this profound connection firsthand, night after quiet night. It likely infused their scientific endeavors with a spiritual depth, a sense of wonder that transcended mere calculation. So, as you drift into slumber, picture that desert sky one last time. Imagine the gentle wind carrying the echoes of ancient debates, the soft scratch of a scribe's pen, the murmured prayers guided by celestial alignments. See the faint glimmer of an oil lamp in a scholar's chamber, illuminating a manuscript filled with the universe's secrets. The stars above Timbuktu are the same stars that shine on you tonight here in Hanoi. They are the same cosmic dust that formed our world and indeed formed each one of us. We are all, in a sense, made of stardust, and our timeless quest to understand the heavens is simply our way of remembering where we came from and perhaps catching a glimpse of where we are going. Let the whispers of those quiet nights in Mali's desert university wash over you now. Feel the ancient wisdom of the stargazers, their calm curiosity and their enduring connection to the cosmos. As the last images of sand and stars fade, know that the universe continues its gentle, endless dance, always inviting us to look up to wonder and to dream.